the IMF, like we covered last time, was debt trapping Kenya by giving them bad loans and then forcing them into austerity when they couldn't pay and having very little forgiveness and stuff. While Chinese, debt that they may have comes with a lot less strings attached and a lot more flexibility. So the IMF is essentially a new colonial arm that's kind of oppressing Kenya at the moment. But also, you also have politicians who are pocketing some of the loans that are coming from the IMF and other institutions too, but we can get into that next. So first slide says, what is happening in Kenya? Well, let's find out. On the 20th and through the 27th of June, Kenyan youth, comprising around 1/3 of the population, organized mass protests against an IMF-backed finance bill for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. So they came in and they tried to pass a bill that was not liked by the very young population of Kenya. Mobilization occurred primarily online under the hashtag Reject Finance Bill 2024 and led to millions of Kenyans protesting simultaneously in dozens of cities across the country. So they came out in force. They would say, we're not taking any more guff from you. We don't want this bill. We say no. No more austerity. No more IMF debt. Peaceful protests organized and amplified primarily on social media spaces were met with police violence and state-orchestrated kidnappings and killings. You had several kids get shot during this whole debacle.
Incredible. Also incredible to see the uprising for just a bill being proposed, not even passed,
Yeah, and that it says a lot about a young population who is keen on looking things up on the internet before they just believe it, sight unseen, and try to get to the bottom of who's to blame for their issues, the strength of Kenya. And I think you'll find that there's a lot to be said about Western interference in Kenyan politics for the last however long, 80 years. So earlier in the year, the U.S. declared Kenya a major non-NATO ally out of nowhere. They just decided, while all these uprisings and things are going on and there's, talk about austerity, all of a sudden Joe Biden comes in and shakes the hand of the president of Kenya and says, we're now officially a major non-NATO ally, which is symbolic, right? Following a U.S. state visit, President Ruto, in partnership with the U.S. government, deployed 1,000 Kenyan police officers to Haiti for peacekeeping, quote-unquote, efforts, despite attempts by local courts to block the motion as unconstitutional. So don't you find it bizarre, Mike, that they're actually sending the United States wants to get Kenyans to send police officers from Kenya to Haiti? What happened to borders and what's going on?
Funny how that doesn't matter when it's in the U.S.'s interest, right? When the U.S. overthrows does a coup in Haiti, and they want to keep down, unpopular sentiment among the populace, they don't have any problems transcending borders and sovereignty when it comes to that. I'm also just curious that they were able to get Kenya to do it. It's what's in it for Kenya? But I guess they just have that much of a hold on Kenya's politicians to be able to get them to.
Yeah, and it's a history, I guess, that we'll have to go into at some other point. But, we just have to wait and see, I guess. I don't know enough about it right now, but I have my suspicions based on, the historical evidence that the United States loves to subvert the elections of these poor places, extract the wealth out of the country. We were just doing a story about Congo earlier where, this is the richest country on earth, and yet they're with some of the poorest people on earth, which makes no sense. So resource-wise, they have it all, but somehow it all gets extracted, and they don't see any of the wealth before, it invariably goes to the West. The presence of members of the U.S. Congress during the reading of the bill called it into question, the influence of the U.S. government and imperialist powers in Kenyan politics. So I can't imagine that it's a new thing, right?
Yeah.
So here's some primary concerns regarding the finance bill. So what was going on inside the bill that made it such a controversial thing? Well, let's see. You had increased income tax, including the taxation of the unemployed, which hard to get money from money. It's hard to get water from a stone. It's hard to get money from an unemployed person. Let me tell you from personal experience, they'd taken me upside down by the ankles and shook me, and nothing came out.
What can you do?
Increases in government budgets and benefits and salaries, including those of unconstitutional offices. So just frivolous government stuff. Further decreases in the funding of already crippled social services. Again, stripping away everything that's there for the poorest people in that country. Exemption of tax authorities from the Data Privacy Act. Introduction of the land taxes on previously freehold land. So that's a big one. Increased taxation on necessities including gas, food, menstrual product, vehicle imports, etc. So, like we covered last week, we said they're taxing everything from wheelchair wheels to tampons and anything else that's like a necessity for people, gasoline especially, and of course, I think with every increase, when the IMF could go in there and give you a haircut and give you restructure your debt and make it so that you can pay without having to kill people, every percentage point of taxation that has to increase on a third world country or whatever you want to call it in the global south, that's going to equal dead people. Like that's a level of poverty where people are going to go hungry and people are going to die. So what the IMF has been doing, we're going to continue to cover because I'm not going to lie, folks, it's new to me, but it's still one of the more interesting and more, it's hidden away, but still in plain sight as far as you can read business news articles and they'll tell you all about it and stuff, but you don't really understand the inner workings and how it really is a neo-colonial arm. So,
quick note on that also is like a thing people like to talk about a lot is the corruption in African countries, the neo-colonial ones, and they use, it's the typical Western narrative to refer to this as something that's like endemic or just inherent in African countries. If it's usually the racist narrative, right? As if they said the people just cannot manage democracy themselves, and that's why they have to be managed from without by the Western countries. But in reality, the situation, especially if you read something like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, he spends so many chapters talking about the corruption and how it's like if you have a leader in Africa, someone like Sankara, who's going to do the right thing for their people, and they're going to repatriate the profits and the resources and the whatever they're extracting from their continent to be used for the people at home, what happens to him? He gets assassinated because they're not friendly to as a client state for the West. So all you have to do is start that from the top. If you create a corrupt regime where you know that you are a client state you basically are acting as lapdogs to the West, then you're not going to have underlings who are not friendly to your corrupt mission. It's the same thing as if you have like corrupt cops who are on the take. You can't have people who are unfriendly to your corrupt mission, so you will just not hire them or take them out if you find that they are if you have somebody who's just moral and trying to do the right thing for their people. And so to blame it on the people themselves as if this is just some coincidence that this always happens wherever, the West controls these governments as puppet states, it's like, is to miss the forest through the trees, to miss the obvious truth.
Yeah, and I had a lot of people on the last video, maybe everybody saw that it was about Kenya and the IMF debt trapping, that they wanted to specifically blame the politicians for being the sole reason that this whole thing is happening. Well, taking on debt is a responsibility and you should pay it back, and the IMF was nice enough to give you the loan and blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't get into the more deeper, characteristics of the type of lending that is being done, and that it has actually been considered by most academics and people paying attention that it's predatory. What the IMF is doing is predatory. And we'll get into that later.
It's also why it's so great to see Ibrahim Traore too.
Yeah, the new guy from Burkina Faso who is taking over where Thomas Sankara left off so many years ago, which we're going to do a whole profile piece on that dude here soon, because he is one of the most fascinating world leaders around right now. So Gen Z uprising, dubbed the Gen Z movement, it is decentralized and primarily led by youths in Kenya, ages 15 to 35. The mobilization and information sharing primarily occurs on social media platforms, and the strategies include civic education, a translation of political jargon into very simple terms, kind of like this show, taking kind of complicated things and
hopefully
hearing me say them in a very stupid way. Translation of the finance bill into dozens of local languages, which is a very cool thing to do, to educate people. You really have to educate people if you want a revolution. If you want to overtake the oppressive forces in your town, community, state, nation, whatever, you need to be educated. And that's why the United States, the revolution is few and far between and far out on the horizon, because we're dummies. We've descended into knuckle-dragging the ground, mouth-breathing orangutans who have no idea what we want to do other than play Angry Birds and eat fried chicken. Sharing the personal contacts of members in parliament in order to bombard them with messages. Very good. Doxing your opponent, making sure that they have no peace, going to their house, blaring the megaphone out all hours of the night, blasting share over the loudspeaker. If I could turn back time. Sorry, old reference there, people. Live online public discussions largely hosted on X Spaces to discuss strategy and engage in political discourse. So, see, I mean, it sounds like these kids know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't know they were using X, but that makes sense. I mean, if it touts itself as the free speech platform, and if you had the Arab Spring on the same platform years ago, why not try and do the same thing here?
Yeah, and if I'll applaud Elon if he does something good. If he is lax and loose with his rules about what goes on that platform, but he still amplifies right-wing voices more so than left-wing voices. So, free speech, sure, but he doesn't make it easy. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Scumbag. All right, so next slide. Let's see if we can get to the next one. During a public address following the protests, President William Ruto, once in the ICC for war crimes, denounced the peaceful protesters as criminals and called for their actions as treasonous. Well, yeah, okay. I'm beginning to doubt all these labels like terrorists and stuff. Like, I think some of my favorite people are criminals.
Weird.
I'd have to say. Weird, huh? So I'm feeling, I guess that's how it goes. Like Bob Dylan said, to live outside the law, you must be honest. Honestly, and I think that equals, you got to have huevos. You got to have huevos to live outside the law. You got to believe in what you think is right and be okay with that label, traitorous criminal or terrorist or whatever. After failing to acknowledge the 5+ deaths caused by the police during the first mass protest, he unconstitutionally deployed the military on protesters in the following demonstrations. So it touts itself on being this democracy or whatever because they're hooked up with the neoliberal West. And so, oh yeah, we're very cool and easygoing. They're just the same, if not, worse as far as corruption and repression, and every country that has capitalism has it. All these countries that institute neoliberal policies or neoconservative policies, anything capitalist, you're going to find oppressed people who aren't being taken care of, who have the right to protest, who are being brutally beat down in the streets and killed just for talking about it, trying to get attention for it. So the police tear gassed and illegally detained and shot the peaceful protesters with live rounds. Following the protests, police committed massacres in low, medium-income neighborhoods such as Githurai and Rongai. Sorry, guys, I don't know if I did that right. Which the government refuses to acknowledge. The current death toll is reported to be about 23, with hundreds more injured. So they actually came out and killed people, just like they did in the turn of the century in the United States when there was unions forming to try to get, a minimum wage and a basic things. Like, we don't want children being ground up in meat packing machines or something. We don't want women working in the phosphorus place where they work at a phosphorus factory where they make matches, and they get this thing called phossy jaw, where their jaw just rots away. And in the 1800s and the turn of the century too, in Britain, where they had these factories and stuff, you had all these women, and they called it phossy jaw. Oh, you get phossy jaw, and your whole mouth just starts rotting, and pretty soon, like eventually, if you keep working, your whole jaw will fall off. It rots the bone. Crazy stuff. But we fought against that tooth and nail, and we had to die while protesting to get it. And they came to union strikes, and they sent goons, hired goons, and killed people, killed children. And we've already been through this, and we keep going through this inhumanity in different spots and different sides, and it's all leads to capitalism. When the factory owner can send goons down to break up these kind of events or these protests or whatever, what chance do you really have?
So just a quick note, you notice you're not hearing anything about the Ruto regime in Western media, even though they're obviously being brutally repressive. They're not getting the same framing because they are a Western-friendly country, as it said earlier, a non-NATO ally.
Yeah, they're going to make it out to seem like, oh yeah, he's a good guy. He's a democratic neoliberal guy. He's a good president. I don't understand the kids, they're always protesting about something. They're unruly. They'll shut up.
Probably sponsored by Russia.
They're probably just soaking in the propaganda. They're in with the LGBTs and they'll dismiss them any way they can in that media. Oh yeah, young people. They're communists. That's a good one. Call anybody who's asking to not be brutally oppressed anymore, beaten or raped or extorted. Anybody just asking, hey, can you stop just reaming my butthole? And people would be like, no, I'm sorry.
Chinese propaganda.
Yeah, you're just spreading Chinese propaganda. You're a communist for not wanting to get your butthole reamed. Sorry for my language, folks. I know that this is a family show, and we try to keep it friendly. But sometimes I get so darn mad. You guys can understand my anger. It's palpable. So all of that over taxes? No. Not in a country where politicians are some of the highest paid government workers in the world with $7,000 per month, while minimum wage is $140 per month. 65% of women suffer from period poverty, with minors often resorting to sex work for exchange for pads. Yikes. See, that's not really acceptable, is it, to be in a civilization like that?
That's rough.
The youth unemployment rate is high as 67%. So they have no work. They can't find work. They don't want to work. They see a society probably like we do not worth participating in. 0.01% of the population own more wealth than the bottom 99.9% of the population. So, well, there you go right there. I mean, come on, folks. Why do we have to spell it out for chuds all across the fucking world? If you are seriously not understanding the consequences of income inequality and the vast inequality between the rich and the poor, when you hear statistics like the 0.01% of the population own more of the wealth than the bottom 99.9% of the population, and then you bitch because there's people out protesting, I have no idea what to tell you. And you see, somebody sent me today, it's a $28 bag of organic frozen strawberries somewhere in California. I don't know it's affecting everybody.
Not going to get better either.
The truth is right in front of your eyes. And the crop failures and the climate change and all that stuff is going to come. It's going to make everything more expensive. When are you going to start siding?
Someday we will do another segment on the rise of sex work, even among minors, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and people will blame the failures of communism without understanding that that's capitalism. When comes in and changed the system and ended socialism, the post-Soviet Union had some of the highest rates of sex work among minors. It was just horrific conditions, and now even to this day, like that's why Eastern Europe and so many of the Balkan countries are known for to the point that it's a stereotype. I think I mentioned it on here before, that you have the movie Taken, based on that literal stereotype that sex work and trafficking is done in Balkan countries because they're so corrupt. It's like, that's the result of the end of the Soviet Union. But sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
Yeah. No, but you're right. You're right. And they always try to turn around and blame it on communism. It's a lack of stability that keeps people from doing that. And that in the sex work, that's the last commodity that you truly can own and, farm out or whatever, however you want to look at it. Rent yourself out by the pound. That's the last really true place you can go to make money in that situation, especially if oligarchs manage to sweep up all the land, all the useful factories, all the useful, indentured workforces. If they already capture all that, which in the United States, it's the same thing. And apparently in Kenya, it's the same thing too. You have the factory owners, they own everything, and then you have everybody else. And we're all kind of fighting over the scraps, while the government does everything it can do to tax you over, and then again funnel that money through Wall Street or through the military-industrial complex, whatever. It's vampiric. That, and in a capitalist society, even in a democracy, the government becomes parasitic too, and just feasts off you. So the libertarians aren't wrong in some sense that the taxes are just getting sucked up and then most of the taxes are Social Security, okay, so you're actually helping old people, but a fair amount go to things that don't really benefit us. They go to subsidies for companies that shouldn't be getting subsidies, like the meat and dairy industry for polluting the atmosphere. I saw a thing that said a pound of hamburger would cost $30 if it wasn't for subsidies. But the point is, if things are this bad, 1%, 99%, and it's been like this for 20 years. Ask yourself, people, what's your breaking point? What's the moment when you say, no more, I'm going to go? Because there's already people lighting themselves on fire. So you really have to ask yourself, what's your breaking point? Just saying. That's
incredible, Chris. And not to sidetrack us too much, but I know if I mentioned anything about the vegan thing, it could always put us on a tangent, but whatever. I mean, it's your show. Do whatever you like. I had no idea that a pound would be $30. That just tells me that the most effective thing to be done for the vegan cause would be to end those subsidies at any cost. Like, by any means possible, literally. Like, that would do more for the vegan movement than anything else I could think of, to hit people in their wallets where it really hurts that way.
Yeah. And then, what you'll have armies of farmers coming out saying, I would love to kick your ass because you're taking away my livelihood. That's a thing. And that's the whole point about the farmer protest in Europe. And we'll get on a quick sidetrack here, but they're basically protesting in Europe over green regulations where they're trying to cut down the amount of whatever, I think it's CO2 or whatever, greenhouse gases and something like that. It's an environmental regulation that they're making farmers do. And it's forcing farmers in a position where they're going to go bankrupt and they're going to have to sell their farm to some bigger institution like BlackRock or some private equity firm. And they don't want to do that. And so they protest and they're smearing shit all over these city hall and stuff. One of the things that they tried to do too was end subsidies for diesel fuel for farmers, which they're already on this razor thin budget. And it wouldn't have been feasible for these farmers to take another pay cut and still have food. So crazy shit. And of course, the right wing jumps in at the last minute and goes, we stand up for the farmers, when in reality, and because the right wing people don't give a fuck about environmental regulations. They hate it all.
Literal opportunism.
But the farmers who are in charge of the protest says, we don't actually oppose these regulations. We think it's good for the environment. We're not climate deniers like the politicians are supporting us, but we just can't financially do this. And so subsidies are going to the wrong places, and they're trying to strip it away because times are tight and everything. It's going to be a whole mess. So anyway, getting back to the Kenya story. Although the finance bill has been tabled for now, so they took it back, thank God. The movement has generated a wave of political consciousness among the youth, some of who are calling the impeachment of Ruto or a dissolution of the current government, which might be a good idea. There has been increased public discourse on the normalization of government corruption, the role of neocolonialism on policy making, misappropriation of public funds, and predatory lending practices, of course, the IMF. So, and the IMF, this is going to be the big story of the week. We're going to go into another story right after this about that. Currently, Kenyans are still protesting the existing tax burden placed on citizens living in an economy struggling due to its excessive government borrowing. The corruption and political incompetence, of course. Citizens of other African countries have shown solidarity with Kenyans, with some stating that it has inspired them to organize against their own government. So we are hoping to see a big wave happen where we're going to start talking about Congo and we're going to start talking about Eritrea. And we're going to get to the bottom of why these countries seem to always get loans and international development from the USAID and aren't able to ever come out with something truly tangible that does something good for their community. Because believe it or not, just so happens that they just never really quite get any really big infrastructure projects done. So